Exactly what constitutes federal stalking? What does it really take for someone to be charged with a federal stalking crime? And are there federal laws regarding the use of GPS trackers? Now, I deal with a lot of clients who believe they are being stalked, and these are some of the biggest questions that they ask me. So let's take a deep dive and try to answer exactly when does using a GPS tracking device become a federal stalking crime. I think the first thing to understand before we jump into the federal level of things, though, is to know what state laws there are that pertain to the use of GPS tracking devices. This is important because if specific state laws are being broken, then it is most likely that it would be investigated and prosecuted at that level first. Now, I have done a lot of investigating and researching and have come to this one conclusion when it comes to state laws regarding GPS tracking devices. That one conclusion is that no two states are the same. Yeah. Who'd have thunk it? Every state has a different take, a different law, or no law whatsoever regarding the use of GPS tracking devices. Now, I also think it's safe to say that for the laws that are out there that speak specifically about GPS devices, the law would probably pertain to other types of tracking devices as well. But as I always say, I am not an attorney, nor do I play one on YouTube or TV for that matter, and nothing in this video or any of my videos should ever be considered legal advice. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. In all of my research, I discovered that there are a lot of states like Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Vermont, Washington, and Wyoming do not have any specific laws on the books at the time of this video being produced that talk directly about the use of GPS tracking devices. Now, that is not to say that they don't have other laws that would prohibit the use of electronic tracking devices under other stalking, harassment, and surveillance statutes. That is 28 total states with no GPS laws in place. The others all have some form of law that directly references GPS tracking devices, but that doesn't paint a clear picture either because, as I stated before, no two states are identical in their laws regarding GPS devices. For instance, California's law says it is illegal for any person or entity to use an electronic tracking device to determine the location or movement of a person without their consent. I imagine that caveat is in there, for instance, where a family may be using location software on their phone so they know where everyone in the family is when they expect to get somewhere and things like that. California's GPS law further states that this applies to both tracking a person directly or tracking a vehicle. Violation is a misdemeanor that's punishable by up to 180 days in jail. And it has key exceptions that apply if the registered owner, the lessor, or the lessee of the vehicle has consented. As well, there are exceptions for law enforcement when acting lawfully. Now, in Florida, on the other side of the country, their laws were recently revised, making it a second-degree felony if you use a tracking device, be it GPS, software, whatever, to commit or facilitate a dangerous crime, particularly in domestic relationships and stalking situations. The Florida law also states it is illegal to use a tracking device on another person's property without their consent, similar to California and other states. Now, this begs the question, is it legal to use a tracking device on your own vehicle if your spouse or another person is using the vehicle? I mean, after all, you own it. Even if you and your spouse own it together, can you track it legally? Before we jump into that can of worms, let's look at some of the other nuances of the states that have tracking laws. Louisiana prohibits using a tracking device to determine a person's location or movement without consent and prohibits installing a tracking device on a vehicle without the owner's consent. And the Louisiana law covers both the installation of the device and the use of tracking data gathered without consent, making this much broader than some of the other states. Rhode Island's law says it's a criminal offense to place a tracking device on a vehicle without the consent of the owner or person in lawful possession of the vehicle. That is a new twist there. A person in lawful possession of the vehicle. So that might cover work vehicles, the other spouse's vehicle, even if it is jointly owned, and numerous other scenarios. Now, the GPS laws in Texas further define a tracking device as any device capable of emitting an electronic frequency or other signal used to identify, monitor, or record location. But then Texas also has carved out room for licensed private investigators to use GPS tracking devices who have written consent from the owner. And Texas also has affirmed defenses if the device is used to assist a peace officer in the course of a criminal investigation or by court order. Virginia's laws define an electronic tracking device as any electronic or mechanical device that permits a person to remotely determine or track the position and movement of another person. Virginia also has key exceptions to the law too, like for law enforcement, parents or legal guardians, electronic communications providers when disclosed in their terms of service, employers tracking their fleet of vehicles under certain circumstances, and registered private investigators, again, under certain circumstances. Virginia's law was passed in 2021 and is notable for requiring both deceptive means and use of the data to track. So installation alone may not necessarily trigger the statute if it isn't actually used to monitor the person. Wisconsin specifically names global positioning device in their laws. It is a crime to place a global positioning device or a device equipped with global positioning technology on a vehicle owned or leased by another person without that person's consent. And Wisconsin law further states it is also prohibited to intentionally obtain location or movement information generated by a GPS device that was placed without consent. In all of my research, I determined that there were 11 states that have laws in place that explicitly address the use of GPS tracking devices, 29 states that don't have any laws, and the remaining 10 states, I found some citations that led me to believe they might have GPS laws, but I couldn't confirm it for sure. Now, before we discuss the federal angle on this issue of the legality of using GPS trackers, I think it is important to look at the one big takeaway I saw in reviewing each state. That one big thing is that regardless of the law, I believe the biggest consideration could lie in the intent of the person using the tracking device. Regardless of whether you own the vehicle or not, regardless of whether you have consent or not, if the intent to use a tracking device is for illegal purposes like stalking, the defensible mechanisms in place in these laws diminish greatly. But what about federal laws? Do federal laws allow for more or less usage of GPS or other electronic tracking devices? And do federal laws surpass state laws? In all of my research, I could not come up with any one specific law that spoke directly about the use of GPS trackers from a federal level. But does that mean it is not against the law from the federal standpoint? Along with a lot of other interesting federal laws, I did run across this one in particular, 18 U.S.C. 2261A. This law is also known as the Interstate Stalking Law that took effect in January 2, 2001. In essence, I would paraphrase this law's definition of interstate stalking as anyone who travels in interstate or foreign commerce or within special maritime and territorial jurisdictions of the United States or enters or leaves Indian country with the intent to injure, harass, or intimidate another person. It further defines it if the actions of the individual places any person in reasonable fear of death or serious bodily injury. The way I read this, and you may draw different conclusions yourself, and if so, I would love to hear them in the comments below. Just try to keep it civil. But the way I interpret it is this. regardless of how someone is stalked, be it by the means of a GPS tracker, software on a phone or another device, or anything else. It is a crime under this and probably other federal statutes. And this is the big reason I always caution PIs when it comes to using these devices. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. But what if you think you have a GPS tracker on your car right now? How can you find it? What should you do? Well, check out this video.